On today's video, I'm going to be installing this budget chip that I've purchased for my Ford Ranger. As you can see, I've actually crossed out the names and hidden them because this is an unbiased review. So if this chip is completely garbage and it does nothing, I don't want to badmouth the actual manufacturer of it simply because I'm not here to wreck somebody's reputation or anything like that. If a product works really good, I'm going to remove all the labels and that, and you can see what brand it is. But if it doesn't, I'm going to be completely honest and say, no, stay away from it. This is bad. Don't, use it whatsoever. So I'm just going to be covering the installation of it, do a little bit of testing, check out the fuel pressure, see what it does with the fuel pressures, and then take it out for a test drive and see if it actually makes any difference on a test drive. So how this actual chip works is, this is the fuel rail on a Ford Ranger, and essentially what it does, the chip intercepts this signal here. And how it does that is essentially by unplugging this and plugging it into the chip, then the other side of the chip plugs into the fuel rail, and it tricks the fuel rail sensor into thinking there's less fuel in the rail, therefore thinking that the computer's going to tell it to send more fuel into the rail, thus putting more fuel into the cylinder. That's the basics of the actual chip. If I remove it from this box, as you can see, this basically just plugs straight into, well, this end here rather, plugs, if I can get it right, into the rail like that, and then this end here plugs into the plug that goes to the computer, which sends the signal. So it's a pretty sort of basic fuel only chip. There's nothing too complex about it. If anything, it's going to adjust the fuel rail pressure that we see coming out of the fuel rail to the injectors, and essentially that's going to be all that it does. It's not going to affect boost or anything like that, or change the map of the computer. It's just simply going to trick the computer into pumping more fuel through the injectors and into the combustion chamber. So with this particular chip, it's adjustable. So as you can see here, it says less power or more power. So by turning the dial that's on the actual chip, which is here, we can adjust how much fuel it sends into the rail and into the injectors. There is an instruction manual that comes with it, but it's really sort of straightforward. This is just a bit of a brief description on what sort of engines it suits. So there we go, we got the 2.2 TDCi, and it does also cover the 3.2 TDCi Ranger. Now, before I go any further, I am going to take a baseline reading of my fuel pressure at 2000 RPM. The reason why I'm going to do this is I'm going to check how the actual chip affects the fuel pressure at the rail when it's connected and when I adjust it. So I'm just going to fire the car up now. And as you can see, we've got, at about 850 RPMs, we've got a baseline fuel pressure of, let's say, 22,000. When I increase the revs up to 2,000, we're at about 70,000. If I go higher, 3,000 RPM, we're at 100,000. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to connect the chip, start the car up again, and just see what figures we have with the chip installed. Just in case you missed it, here are the figures without the chip. So now I'm going to connect the chip and see how much those figures change. Damn EGR bypass makes things a bit difficult. Alright, so I have released the plug. There it is off the fuel rail. Now what I'm going to do is just simply plug that chip in from one side, and the other side will go into the rail. And that is the chip plugged in. So when I turn the ignition on, we should see a green light pop up on that chip. There it is. So we're sitting at about 22,000 RPM again on idle, so no real change there. I'm just going to bring it up to 2,000 RPM and see what happens. Going to go up to 3,000. Here are the figures with the chip plugged in. So clearly at 2000 RPM there, we can see that it's leaning out the pressure quite considerably. We were previously sitting on 70,000 kPa, now it's down to 52,000 kPa. The idle still looks the same, and 3000 RPM is sort of roughly the same. What I'm going to do now is adjust the setting on the actual chip itself and see what sort of a difference it makes. According to the instructions, if I turn the dial anti-clockwise, I'm going to be getting more power. So it says to do it half a turn at a time up here. I just read it. So it says turn the adjustment screw by half a turn clockwise direction or half a turn anti-clockwise. I'm going to be a bit rebellious. I'm going to go a full turn and see what happens. Full turn counterclockwise. So on idle, we are still at the original figure of around 22,000 kPa. If I bring the revs up, oh wow, fuel pressure is even lower. Higher there. So I'm going to go the complete maximum power, which is 4 turns anti-clockwise. That's as far as it'll let me go. All right, so we're on the max setting. Let's see what happens. Whoop. Idle is pretty much still the same. Let's bring the revs up. $49,000. $90,000. So here are the final figures after doing that fuel pressure rail test. As you can see, without the chip, the fuel pressures were actually a lot higher all the way across the board. When I plugged the chip in right at the start, we could see a big decrease in fuel pressure in the mid-range. So we went from 70,000 kPa down to 52. Up top was pretty similar. And then after, when I maxed the setting out for the maximum power on the chip, we noticed a considerable decrease in the fuel pressure in the mid-range and up top. So what's a bit concerning to me is that the desired fuel pressure actually went down with the fuel pressure in the rail. So instead of the desired fuel rail pressure staying the same, which is 70,000, the desired fuel pressure went down as the rail pressure went down as well. So in essence, from what I can gather from that, is that this car is going to be running lean all the way through the rev range. Because if the desired fuel pressure stayed the same and the rail pressure actually was lower, well then that would kind of make sense, as the pressure in the rail would then have to come up to the desired fuel pressure, where the ECU would be telling it to pump more fuel in to come up to the desired fuel pressure. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take it out for a test drive and see what happens, see if I can feel any difference, and then make a conclusion from there. Whoa! Whoa, I'm stopping there. That's injector knock. Wow. Alright, time to pull back in. Wow, what a disaster that was. Instead of pumping more fuel into the injectors and fattening it up, it's done actually the complete opposite. It's leaned it out, as you can see by these settings. So essentially what it's done, it's leaned out all the way through the rev range, and as soon as I got onto load, I started getting really bad injector knock, and I just essentially just drove the car back straight into here. Now, before I write this chip off completely, I'm gonna turn the dial clockwise all the way to the lowest setting, then take a quick reading of the fuel pressures and see what that does on the most minimum setting. So this is on the most minimum setting you can put it on. We're back to our 22,000 fuel pressure. I'm going to just bring it up to 2,000 RPM. So what are my final thoughts on this chip? With the chip installed, it actually decreased the pressure at the fuel rail. So instead of increasing it, actually decreased it, and the target fuel pressure went down with it. So the computer was actually telling the fuel pressure regulator to regulate less and less fuel as we turned up the gain on the chip itself. So this was clearly indicated by, as soon as I took the car out for a test drive, we had really bad injector knock, which to me means that there was probably not enough pressure in the injectors, which is a really bad thing, and I was actually pretty glad that I only just got out of my driveway when I noticed. That is my conclusion. Luckily, this chip comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so I'm going to be sending it back. And look, this is not to say that all chips are like this. Like I said, this is just a simple test on a budget chip. This is $150, so it's not like it's a top-of-the-range chip or anything like that. It's just one of these cheap budget ones. So this was just my test that I concluded. You can, take it with a grain of salt whether it was accurate or not, but clearly these figures here and the knocking that you can hear in the video speak for themselves. So until next time, see you guys later.